Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome back to day 13 of Teaser season for patch 3.27 and the upcoming Keepers of the Flame expansion. Today, we're going to be taking a further look at Bloodline Ascendancies. In the first part of this video, we covered a quick recap of what the Bloodline Ascendancies are, and we covered the Feral Bloodline, the Lycia Bloodline, and the Delirious Bloodline. If you missed that video, I'll put a link to it down in the description below, and I will also link to Grinding Gear Games' announcement of all 6 of the bloodlines that they put out today. Let's have a look at Lich Catarina in this video, Primordial Knight All, and also Runesmith Olroth. All of these are at the more niche end. These are not going to be things that are automatically wham bam, yes, I'm going to take this on nearly every build. Instead, they're going to be specific niche problem solvers for a number of people. Some interesting things going on here, but often you're going to stay with 8 points in your traditional ascendancy, or you're going to take 2 points out of the Delirium Ascendancy, which has some really strong nodes in it, albeit really strong nodes that are really hard to use. That said, there are definitely things that are worth playing around with in these 3. Let's start with Lich Catarina. Once more, we need to call out these small notables, because some of the small notables, not really in this case, have overwhelming drawbacks associated with them. And let's start with the fun one, shall we? Offering Duration and Death Offering. Most of you are not ever going to take this on a build. Offering Duration. Offering skills have 20% increased duration. That's a small node. Death Offering. 50% increased effect of offerings. This is a very strong and very hard to get stat. So you're thinking, must be a drawback, right? Unfortunately, yes. There is a drawback. This drawback is not just severe, it is monstrous. When the offerings expire, so too do the minions that they're affecting. But they've also worded this very carefully. Damageable targets. That wording is very carefully chosen because you are a damageable target, and as a result, you probably don't want any of your offerings to be affecting you and then to expire. Otherwise, bad things might happen. Death Offering, I think, is one of those things that's quite funny, but it's going to be very, very corner case builds that use it. That said, there are a lot of things in the game that are for corner case builds. Heartbound Loop comes to mind, and that's definitely a player favorite. So maybe Death Offering will find some really weird use case, or maybe you'll just use it in conjunction with really short-lived minions, and you'll get some additional value out of them while they're present. That said, most people, I think, are not going to take this notable. After this, we have Prolonged Servitude. The small node leading up to this is just 25% increased minion damage, which is a good stat and a good chunk of it, but the reason you're taking this is for Prolonged Servitude itself. This is a strong notable. This is going to do a lot for you. So, minions deal 15% more damage when they're on low life. This is a reasonably strong effect, but you probably don't have all that much control over how long it lasts for. However, your minions basically get 6 additional seconds to live when they fall to 1 life. Now, my rating of this is going to brick anything that causes minions to explode usefully for you. For example, More of Mischief. More of Mischief is usually used to cause your own golems to explode for you, and it's through the use of this Death Wish skill. The Death Wish skill cannot affect immortal minions, minions without a life pool, or minions that are already prepared to explode by the skill. As a result, I expect that will expand to include any temporarily immortal minions that are under Prolonged Servitude at the time. Now, one thing that I think could be really funny in conjunction with Prolonged Servitude is using it alongside Infernal Legion support. Infernal Legion support essentially sets all of your minions on fire and tells them to go and hug people. Normally, though, the minions burn themselves up really quickly, but with Prolonged Servitude, they get to feel the warmth for a little bit longer. So this is definitely something that you could experiment with. Whether it's any good or not is going to be something we'll have to discover. Also, just saying that the Formless Inferno, which is no longer going to drop from its original sources in patch 3.27, but this is tailor-made for this playstyle, and it is something that definitely might be interesting to play around with in conjunction with this Lich Catarina node. That's Prolonged Servitude. This is going to be an interesting one to watch. It's strong if it is played straight. It's strong if you just use this to boost up existing minions. After this, we have Umbral Army. Umbral Army is buffing you. You're drawing strength from your minions, and the small node that leads into it is 25% minion life. Now, it's worth noting that 25% minion life is a potentially very, very powerful stat, because there are a number of builds that intentionally explode their minions, and they tend to like getting more life on those minions. It's not the easiest stat in the world to get. What does Umbral Army provide? 2% increased attack and cast speed on you per summon Raging Spirit that you've got. 15% increased attack damage per raised zombie that you've got. Now these are the two aspects of Umbral Army I am least impressed by. 2% increased attack and cast speed per summon Raging Spirit is live text if you're playing SRS. The problem is that it's just cast speed, you're getting quite a bit of it, but I don't think it's enough to justify a 2-point Ascendancy notable. After that, you have the attack damage for your character per raised zombie that you've got. This is an appreciable amount, but it's asking a lot of you, and all it's giving you is percentage increased attack damage, which is a stat that you probably have quite a lot of on a character like that. I don't think that's going to work well for most builds. There will, however, be corner cases where it works. Let's now jump to the 3 good lines here. 12% increased defenses per raised spectre. I think this is the strongest individual line here. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the current maximum number of raised spectres that you can have on your character is 14. That's the permanent ones. I think you can also have 2 transient ones as well. Alternately, you can go down to 7. And if you go down to 7, you're not required to use any items that say you cannot use non-spectre minions. These are going to require putting on a bunch of pretty mediocre items, but that's the theoretical limit. That's what you can go with if you wanted to maximize the theoretical number of spectres going around and the maximum possible benefits from Umbral Army. In practice, a well-rounded build might actually have less than this, but you still don't want to sneeze at this. This is a lot of power that's coming out of this node. On top of this, we have the Summon Phantasm line. Now this is giving you movement speed. It's kind of going to be a bit awkward here. This is going to be movement speed that's mostly active when you're standing still and spamming skills. In that case, your Phantasms, they're going to be up, but then when you're running pack to pack, they're going to start fading off. So this is going to be like a decaying movement speed buff, but it's still going to be a big amount of movement speed. I think this is the second best line here, and the best line, of course, being the defenses per raised spectre. After that, we have 6% increased spell damage per summoned skeleton. Now, this is absolutely tailor-made to be used in conjunction with a Dark Pact. So imagine this, you pop Vile Summoned Skeletons, there's a whole army of skeletons that pops up, they do modest damage, you're not really massively spec'd into the minions' damage themselves, instead, you spec them for minion life. And that's because you're going to be spamming Dark Pact, and you're going to be eating up those skeletons, consuming their life, in order to fuel this spell. When you're doing so, at least initially, when you've got all of those skeletons active, you're going to get a huge amount of bonus spell damage as well. So Umbral Army has a whole bunch of pieces here. You probably don't want all 5 pieces on the same build. Probably you're going to look at this and say, you know what, the Raging Spirits aspect, I don't care about that at all. That does nothing for me. The attack damage per raised zombie, that's absolutely nothing for me. But the Raised Spectre and the Summoned Skeleton components alone, they make it a worthwhile notable to take. This is the raw power aspect of this Ascendancy. It is definitely not something that every minion build is going to want, and it's honestly probably better for a build that, like Catarina herself, primarily does damage through your own skills, but you've also got a huge cheerleading squad along with you that you bring with you, raise from the dead when you need them, and then when you don't need them anymore, they go splat. That is a Catarina Ascendancy. All in all, I think that this is going to be very niche. There's not very many established builds that want this, but there are some interesting things going on there, and so you could definitely build something that's a little bit different and slot in 2 points from the Catarina Ascendancy. I do not think many people are going to be interested in taking 4 points here, although I could see a case for going Prolonged Servitude and Umbral Army together, and then having those skeletons just be that bit more durable. That's definitely got some potential, but it's also going to be fairly clunky while you don't have Vile Summoned Skeletons up. It's going to feel absolutely phenomenal when you do have Vile Summoned Skeletons. When you don't, it's going to feel pretty clunky. Next, we're going to jump to All the Crystal King, All the Primordial Knight. Now, All the Crystal King has a very strong small notable with him, and also has a couple of quite tricky things going on. But firstly, I want to focus on the King's Contempt, King's Heritage, and King's Might here, not for any reason other than flavor. Here, I just want to point out something that a lot of people haven't noticed. Have a look at the King's Contempt, and you'll notice that this is power charge related. Discipline has 50% increased aura effect when you have no power charges. Wrath has 50% increased aura effect when at maximum power charges. Now, have you seen any text like this before? Yes, you probably have, on the generally not very popular, not very used unique item Arn's Contempt. Arn's Contempt has a text -1 to maximum power charges, gain 8 to 12% of physical damage, added as extra chaos damage when you're at maximum power charges, and when you're at minimum power charges, i.e. none, you take 50% reduced extra damage from critical strikes while you're in this situation. Now, I don't think that this item is particularly good. The reason that I call it out here is that this is evidence of something that people who've been following all of the lore of Path of Exile worked out a while ago. Arn and all were the same person. They were the same person long in Path of Exile's history, and that's just a little bit of a throwback there. You'll also see the same if you have a look at the King's Heritage and also the King's Might. What about actually using this Ascendancy? This is the one that I am least sold on. There are definitely a few things going on here, but all in all, pun intended, I'm not very impressed with this Ascendancy so far. So we have Charge Duration, which is just a reasonably useful stat, but it has somewhat of a cross purpose with the rest of what's going on here, because whichever of these options you end up picking, you're probably going to end up trying to sit on 0 of that charge. And that means the Charge Duration notable is just not going to do very much for you. There's a few ways that you can set your maximum charges of any of these particular types to 0. Probably the best of these is Eternal Damnation. This amulet is really good, and the charges being set to 0 is a very severe drawback that makes it less good than it would otherwise be, but is actually still quite wearable, even in the current game when it does have this drawback. But even then, I'm just not sold on spending 2 Ascendancy points, much less any other setup, in order to get 50% increased effect of 2 different auras. If it was 2 different auras that stack together really well, if this was to get Determination and Grace, then I'd be much more open to it, but it's 2 different auras that you may or may not want on the same character, but even if you do want both of them on the same character, they're not scaling each other, and so I'm just not really sold. Yeah, there is some power in this notable, but I don't think it's quite 2 Ascendancy points worth, much less 2 Ascendancy points, and you're also required to jump through additional hoops on top of that, additional hoops that might include changing your amulet to Eternal Damnation. It's not that this is doing nothing, I just don't think it's quite doing enough. But let's have a look at the right side, because the right side makes up in part for what the left side happens to be missing. Firstly, 15% increased global defenses. This is a good small node, so keep that one in mind. This is like having 15% increased armor, evasion rating, and energy shield, all on the passive tree. Also 15% increased ward, although if you're interested in ward, you're probably Runesmith Olroth's friend rather than all the Primordial Knight. After that though, we have Precursor's Release, which is a really interesting notable because it does some powerful things, but it does so at significant cost. Now, here again, I want to call to your attention a couple of other items that exist in the game. So firstly, we have the Untouched Soul. The Untouched Soul drops from the King in the Mist. This is a powerful amulet, but it is a very contested slot. The amulet is a slot that has a lot of really good things going on for a lot of different builds. 40 to maximum life for each empty red socket on any equipped item anywhere on your character. 225 accuracy rating for each empty green socket on any equipped item. 40 to maximum mana for each empty blue slot on any equipped item. And then 18% tri-elemental resistance for each empty white socket on any equipped items. There's quite a bit of power that's going on in the Untouched Soul. You're definitely getting a whole bunch of additional rewards if you're willing to put up with having empty sockets, and that has considerable synergy with what all the Primordial Knight's Precursor's Release notable is doing. The other type of item that I want to suggest you consider as potentially having a lot of synergy with Precursor's Release, unfortunately doesn't have quite as much synergy with the Untouched Soul. This is items with Abyss sockets. Now primarily this is going to be unique items. They're the only ones that can get a lot of Abyss sockets. There is also the option of using a Hollow Fossil to craft your own rare that happens to have an Abyss socket in it. So, Light Poacher. One of the variants of this has 2 Abyss sockets in it. After that, a Jeweler's Orb can raise it up to being 4 sockets in total. So that would be 2 gem sockets, which can be linked or unlinked, and also 2 Abyssal sockets. There's also Bubonic Trail, which can have 1 or 2 Abyssal sockets and is in the boot slots. And there's Tomb Fist in the glove slot. And there is Shroud of the Lightless in the chest slot. So these have considerable synergy with Precursor's Release because you're giving up quite a bit with Precursor's Release. You're giving up a bunch of gem slots, but at least with the Abyss uniques, you're getting something back in exchange for that loss. What do you actually get as a payoff here? Well, the reason you would use this is boots. Action speed cannot be modified to below base value if you have equipped boots with no socketed gems in them. This is a slightly higher cost than you're paying for the Trickster's similar node, but it's pretty comparable overall to the new version of One Step Ahead. And it's worth noting that whilst One Step Ahead has been nerfed considerably from what it was in the past, it is still a good node, and it is still a pull into choosing the Trickster Ascendancy. Well, you can get a similar effect from Primordial Knight All, but you're going to have to pay a price, and that price is that you're going to have to go with no sockets in your boots. Not a small price, but it is one that is manageable. The helmet, unfortunately, is kind of meh. The helmet cannot be stunned. There are better solutions for stun than having an equipped helmet with no gems and an Ascendancy notable tied up there. The chest piece is elemental ailments cannot be inflicted upon you. This is a very strong effect, although I do think there are better ways to get it than giving up your chest piece. And no, this is not pulling me into using Calm's Heart anymore, because I don't think Calm's Heart is good enough. Let's see if Foulborn Calm's Hearts exist that are actually good, but at the moment, I'm not sold on the chest piece option. However, the gloves option, take no extra damage from critical strikes if you have equipped gloves with no socketed gems. This one, however, is a pretty strong effect, and so the boots and the gloves, they're both good options, and ultimately, there's things to consider here. What you need is to have a build that isn't under intense socket pressure. That's pretty rare these days, but if you do find yourself in that situation, then All Crystal King does at least offer something on the right-hand side, but nothing at all on the left-hand side. And yes, I did delve deep to find these puns. Bad and terrible jokes out of the way. Let's jump on to the final one of these, which is Runesmith Olroth. Now let's pay attention to some of these small nodes, because these small nodes are pretty juicy again. 15% increased ward from equipped armor items. It is hard to get a lot of ward, and so that's something to keep in mind. These small nodes are not going to be so good that you're going to pick 2 of them, but they are definitely something that is a meaningful bonus for whatever you take behind them. Now, I want to quickly mention Ynda's stand as an item here. This is going to come up a few times in this piece because Ynda's stand has a lot of synergy with things related to Runesmith Olroth. So 15% increased ward from equipped armor items. What if it's your belt that's providing the ward? Well, with Ynda's stand, this has the text gain ward instead of 50% of armor and evasion rating from equipped body armor. Now, the way that I understand this, it is 50, or it's actually 60% in practice because you're probably going to catalyze this belt for defenses, but it's going to be that percentage of armor and evasion rating is still provided by your body armor. So if you had a body armor that said 3000 evasion, no other text on it, with Ynda's stand equipped, and we'll ignore Catalyst for the moment, that is just going to be an armor piece granting 1500 ward and 1500 evasion. And then Runesmith Olroth is going to come along and say, hey, that chest piece is providing 1500 ward. Well, let's scale it up by 15%. That's my understanding here, but I can't test this in game because I'm not aware of anything else that has this exact text on it. And as a result, we're just going to have to see when we're in game whether this works the way that it intuitively works based upon the reading of the text, or whether Grinding Gear Games have gone with a different interpretation. Now let's start with the notable that is all about playing ward straight. You're using ward and you're not doing any shenanigans with it. Enhanced Starlight. Damage taken bypasses unbroken ward. If the hit deals less damage than 15% of your ward, 40% increased ward from equipped armor items. So, if you're wanting to use ward as a defensive layer, what this is going to do is it's going to make sure that it doesn't just fall off the instant a porcupine hits you. Instead, that porcupine spine is going to completely bypass your ward. It's going to attack your life, or depending upon the way you've set up your character, it might attack your energy shield instead, or it might be split between your life and your mana, but it's going to get straight through that ward. That means that then if it's followed up by some massive slam, like the Tier 17 and Originator Influence exclusive modifier that adds Tentacle Friends to your maps, those Tentacle Friend slaps, those are then going to bounce into your ward, and potentially it might take enough of the sting out of those that you're able to then stay standing afterwards. So, when would you actually want this on a character? Well, the answer is when you've got a very probabilistic defense setup. So, you're perhaps running evasion and acrobatics on your character. Acrobatics is a keystone everyone's kind of forgotten about. It was really, really meta for a period. Then spell suppression was introduced to the game. Spell suppression was so good that even though acrobatics mitigates more damage, everyone elected to go with suppression instead. But in this environment, you're going to go with acrobatics instead of using spell suppression. So this modifies the way suppression works. You want 150% suppression instead of just being settled for 100%. Once you do have 150% suppression, 75% of the time that you would take spell damage, you instead take 0. Instead, it is just a complete and utter miss. The other 25% of the time, though, you take full spell damage, and that's where your ward comes in, and your ward is potentially able to keep you alive. Likewise, you have evasion providing probabilistic defense against attacks. Now, this is happening, and the times that something gets through, if it's a very small hit, that's what Enhanced Starlight is for. Let it hit you. But if it's a big hit, then that's where your ward is there to protect you. That's the benefits of this. Now you can use acrobatics, or if you want a chess piece that kind of has it all already, although I do think you can get better than this in a rare, the perfect form is worth your while considering as well. The perfect form might not be easily available in patch 3.27 because it was previously tied to the Uber version of the Tull encounter. This provides 50% spell suppression, so that's 25% spell dodge, and it also provides a reasonable chunk of evasion. It was a lot better before the defenses rework and the level 84 bases were added. And then evasion rating is increased by your overcapped cold resistance. This grants you an option to really scale your evasion rating into the stratosphere. So this is the perfect form. This is something that provides acrobatics on it, or you can just take acrobatics on the tree. That is where I would be looking at going if you're determined to build around Enhanced Starlight. My biggest concern with this setup is that it might be more interesting than it is strong, and you're also not able to get any hybrid evasion and ward bases. Your chess piece can be modified to effectively be a hybrid ward and evasion base by Ynda's stand, but in the other slots, you've got to choose between either traditional defenses, such as evasion, or whether you go with ward in them. And I think it's going to be hard to get the right balance between all of the pieces that you're going to want there, especially given the pressure you'll feel to get 150% spell suppression on the build. So something that's a new defensive option, I'm not sure the numbers are there yet, but there's definitely some things worth trying here. Very niche, but also does do something genuinely interesting, and something I can see people wanting. Volatile Runes is next. This one, I cannot judge. And that's because we don't have the key numbers. Trigger level 20 ward shatter when your ward breaks. We do not know how good this is going to be. It's going to retaliate with physical spell damage around you equal to a percentage of your ward, and inflicting a debuff that nerfs monster movement speed by 20% and prevents their life and energy shield recovery for 4 seconds. So this is a backlash that happens when your ward breaks. In order to use this, you need to be getting in the thick of things. And this is one of those times you might want to use Ynda's stand in conjunction with an armor base, or potentially even an armor energy shield hybrid base. That way you're going to be taking hits frequently, but hopefully between the armor and or the energy shield, you'll be able to endure them. Your ward's going to break, you're going to get this backlash damage as a result, and hopefully that is then going to punish the enemies that hit you. But this is going to live or die based upon how effective this number is, and also how big an area ward shatter hits. If this is the sort of thing where it wipes out an entire screen, it's going to be amazing. If this is the sort of thing that just hits 1/10 of the screen, then it's going to be kind of meh. We'll have to see exactly how it works. There's a lot of things that you could conceivably do with this, but we don't know whether it's any good or not until we're able to test that out, or until Grinding Gear Games provide us with some hard numbers on exactly how ward shatter works. Most notably, it is going to be that AoE. After this, we have the 3 boons. Again, you're going to get 15% increased ward from equipped armor items as you're walking into these. Boon of the River is first, and this is the one that I think people are most likely to take. 5% chance to restore your ward on hit. Now, 5% chances, anyone that's played around with a chieftain knows that sometimes you proc 50 attempts at rolling that 20, and you fail to roll a 20 50 times in a row. In fact, this is going to happen 7.5% of the time, give or take. So Boon of the River is not going to be something that is going to always have your ward up, but it's going to be up reasonably often. This is only going to work if you are hitting extraordinarily fast, but it's going to allow you to have your ward up reasonably often if you are. I would suggest considering this if you are playing some sort of ranged character. Playing a Deadeye, for instance, you're probably peppering the screen with arrows, you're inflicting a very large amount of hits, and ward can be something that can take the edge off a big hit that comes through. And potentially this becomes a defense that you could use well on your character. Next we have Boon of the Mountain. This one is definitely something that you can keep up all the time. Olroth's Resolve is a unique flask that causes your ward to be unable to break. That is, while Olroth's Resolve is active. It is quite difficult to keep this active all the time, but it is possible to keep this active all the time. Even though by default, at 20 quality, it only lasts 4.8 seconds, and it uses almost every charge that it's got when you use it. Also, one thing that's very important with Olroth's Resolve, this is very, very, very negatively affected by increases to Flask effect that are on your character. If you have 20% increases to Flask effect, suddenly this reads 102% less ward during effect. And I'll leave you to work out whether that's useful to your character or not. For some reason, I would say it probably isn't. So you don't want any flask effect. In fact, back when it was possible to get negative flask effect on characters, people who were building around Olroth's Resolve actually genuinely wanted that. Boon of the Mountain, in conjunction with Olroth's Resolve, is a flat 30% less damage taken from damage over time. Is this worth 2 points though? That is a little bit harder to say. You're only getting 15% effective increase in ward. That's from your armor pieces anyway. It's not even going to apply to the small amount of ward that's given by Olroth's Resolve. But this is going to provide you with something that is defensively useful on ward loop builds. Is it worth it? You'll have to make up your own mind. My intuition says most people are going to answer no. If that 30% number was higher, maybe you would consider it. Now we have Boon of the Sun as one to consider here. Boon of the Sun can be used purely defensively, or alternately, it can be used as a mechanism in order to get Volatile Runes to trigger more often. Firstly, let's talk Volatile Runes. In that scenario, it lives or dies based upon whether Volatile Runes is worth triggering all those extra times. So we can't really say much about that. Now, let's talk about Boon of the Sun defensively. This is the one that was the most difficult to parse properly, because there's a lot of complex things going on here. Here, we're going to take a look at an idealized limiting case in order to work out just how good this is. So, 20% faster restoration of ward per enemy hit taken recently. It's important to note, recently refers to 4 seconds, but ward recharge time is 2 seconds by default now. Historically, that was 4 seconds, and even further back it was 5 seconds, but since 3.25, it has actually been buffed to 2 seconds. What happens in a hypothetical scenario where we're taking 1,000,000 hits a second? The reason we're asking it this way is to try and get a sense as to what the limiting behavior is if you start getting hit more and more frequently, because ultimately this is a payoff for being hit frequently, which is something that a ward build doesn't really want to have happen, but what we want to do is smooth it out and take a bit of a best case scenario. So in this scenario, we're recovering our ward 800,000 times as fast as we normally would, which means it's up 400,000 times in every second. Now, we're taking 1,000,000 hits every second. So what you can see here is that if your attacks are perfectly staggered, then your ward is going to be up for about 40% of them. This is the limiting best case scenario. What's going to happen in the real world though, is that you're not going to be taking hits on consistent frames. Instead, there's going to be times that your ward is going to be up more than this, and there's going to be times that it's up less than this. That is going to be the problem that's going to get you here. This is not going to end up being super reliable, and when you take burst damage, you are going to take burst damage. You're going to take multiple hits in a very short period of time, and it's going to shred you. The way that I would think about this is imagine you had 40% spell dodge on your character. How highly would you value this? I feel like I would not value that at an Ascendancy notable. This is going to be worse than 40% spell dodge in most scenarios, even though it applies to attacks as well, because chances are your ward is not absorbing every single point of damage you're taking. My thoughts on Boon of the Sun. I don't think this is good enough. I feel like this is something where if the numbers were slightly higher, this could actually be a really compelling node, and surprisingly much better than it looks. But 20% is not those numbers. I also can't see anything that this synergizes with well enough in order to get it over the line. So Boon of the Sun ends up being something I'm not really interested in taking on any characters that I build this league at the moment, but we shall see. Maybe it does turn out to be enough in some scenarios to just take the edge off 40% of hits. So, where are the big highlights in these 3 Ascendancies? Potentially Volatile Runes. Potentially Volatile Runes, it lives or dies based upon how good Ward Shatter is. And Enhanced Starlight definitely has its niches. Boon of the River definitely has its niches. Neither of these are going to be all-around all-stars taken by lots of characters, but they will have their uses. Primordial Night All has Precursor's release as a problem solver. If you're a Juggernaut, take the Juggernaut node that deals with action speed suppression. If you're a Trickster, take the Trickster node that deals with action speed suppression. If you're not a Juggernaut and you're not a Trickster, then consider Precursor's release. It is going to come at a high opportunity cost because it is going to mess with what you can do in your boots, but you might find the value is there. Otherwise, with the left-hand side, all these nodes really do is tell you that Arn is all. For Catarina the Lich, there's quite a few interesting things going on here. You could definitely brew something really weird with Death Offering. Prolonged Servitude is generic good stuff that is quite good on certain minion builds. Most people are not quite going to fit this in. They're going to think, you know what, this is doing something useful, but it's not exactly powerful enough for me to use it. But Umbral Army definitely has a lot of power if you are already using Phantasms, if you're already using Skeletons, or potentially if you want to build something around Dark Pact there. That's what we've got in these new Ascendancies. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have the results you deserve.